ever think about how, like, stuff that happened ages ago still kind of messes with us today?
Yeah.
Like, take the Cold War, right? It wasn't all, like, guns blazing, but it was definitely intense.
Oh, yeah. It's a total clash of ideologies. Capitalism versus communism, the U.S. and the Soviet Union going head to head.
And the whole world was kind of just watching, right? Holding their breath.
The stakes couldn't have been higher. I mean, we're
Right.
talking about the potential end of the world as they knew it.
Crazy, right?
Totally.
So today we're going to, like, really dig into this whole Cold War thing. We're using the coldwar.pdf.
Yeah.
It's really good at, like, capturing how intense it was to live back then.
Definitely. It was like this constant chess match. Every move could have been the end.
No pressure, right. So let's start with the Marshall Plan.
Mhm.
Imagine Europe after World War II, totally wrecked, right? And the U.S. was like, okay, we got to stop communism from spreading. So they offered this insane amount of money, $13.5 billion.
Which, back then was a fortune.
Like more than $150 billion today.
It was a really smart move. They helped Western Europe get back on its feet, and it stopped the Soviets from having too much influence.
Because, like, if a country is struggling, they're more likely to turn to something new, right? Even if that something is, communism.
Exactly. And the Soviets knew this, which is why they came up with the Cominform. It was their way of, tightening their grip on Eastern Europe.
So it's already divided right off the bat. East versus West, communism versus capitalism.
Yeah, and it just escalated from there.
And then a few years later, bam, the Berlin blockade. What was that all about?
So picture Berlin, right in the middle of Soviet-controlled East Germany. In 1948, Stalin decided to cut off all access to West Berlin.
He was trying to force the Allies out, wasn't he?
Exactly. He thought they would just give up, but he kind of forgot who he was dealing with.
And that's when they started the Berlin airlift. They flew supplies into West Berlin for almost a year. Food, fuel, even coal, right?
It was incredible.
This book says a plane landed every 40 seconds. Every 40 seconds. That's insane.
It was a huge turning point. Stalin had to back down. It proved that democracy could, deliver.
It wasn't just about military power. It was about showing people that the West was there for them.
Yeah, winning hearts and minds.
And, of course, after that, we got NATO and the Warsaw Pact. The world was picking sides.
And it wasn't just about land or resources. It was about, the future of the world.
It's wild to think about.
Totally.
And speaking of wild, let's talk about the Cuban Missile Crisis. This one was scary.
It was as close as we got to a nuclear war.
And it all went down just 90 miles from Florida.
That's way too close for comfort.
So we're talking nuclear missiles right off the coast of Florida.
Yeah, it was a tense time.
Our source mentions this whole Bay of Pigs thing, which probably didn't help.
Oh, the Bay of Pigs, yeah. In 1961, the U.S. tried to overthrow Castro, but it totally backfired.
And that kind of made the Soviets look like Cuba's best friend, huh?
Exactly. It gave Khrushchev the perfect excuse to move in and, put those missiles there.
So the stage is set, right? Everyone's on edge. And then, boom, they find the missile sites.
It was like the whole world just stopped and held its breath.
Our source uses the term powder keg, and it's like, yeah, that makes sense. Was it really like that? Did people know how close we were?
Oh, people were terrified. For almost 2 weeks, nobody knew if it was going to be the end.
It's like something out of a movie.
Except it was real life.
And then Kennedy gives that speech.
Oh, yeah, the one where he's like,
the 17 million people of Cuba have no desire to bring about a nuclear war. It's right here in the source material.
Right, he was talking to the Cubans, but he was really sending a message to Khrushchev.
Like, we're not backing down, buddy.
It was a risky move, but it worked. Behind the scenes, they were negotiating like crazy.
Trying to prevent, annihilation, no pressure or anything.
Seriously. It took days, but they finally reached a deal. The Soviets took the missiles out of Cuba, and the U.S. promised not to invade.
So that was a close one. But the Cold War, it didn't end there, right? We've talked about Europe, we've talked about Cuba, but it was also happening in Asia.
Yeah, all over the globe.
Korea, that was a whole other mess.
It really was a proxy war that became a huge tragedy.
The source says Korea was caught between these two forces, like a hammer and a dagger.
It's a powerful image. Korea was divided, just like Germany. The North was communist, backed by the Soviets, and the South was supported by the U.S.
And then in 1950, everything blew up.
North Korea invaded the South. And the U.S. felt like they had to get involved. They couldn't let communism spread any further.
Containment.
Exactly. But Korea showed that containment wasn't always easy or successful. It was a long, bloody war. And in the end, it didn't really solve anything. Korea is still divided today.
And then there was that whole thing with Truman firing MacArthur.
Yeah, MacArthur wanted to go all out, even use nukes on China. But Truman, he knew that was a line they couldn't cross. It was a tough call, but Truman knew it was the right one. Firing MacArthur, it showed the world that the U.S., they wouldn't just rush into a nuclear war.
It's like, yeah, we want to stop the spread of communism, but not at any cost.
Exactly.
Wild times, right. So we've been talking about all these conflicts, all this tension, but eventually the Cold War did end.
Yeah, thankfully.
And our source says this guy, Gorbachev, he played a big role in that.
Oh, Gorbachev, yeah. He was the leader of the Soviet Union in the 80s. By then, the Soviet Union was, not doing so great.
The economy was a mess,
Yeah.
right? And they were spending a ton on weapons.
Exactly. And Gorbachev, he knew things had to change, so he introduced these reforms, perestroika and glasnost.
Perestroika, that was about fixing the economy, right? More like a free market kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly. And glasnost, that was about openness, transparency, like letting people speak their minds.
Which is a pretty big deal when you've been living under, like, total control for decades.
Huge. People finally had a voice. And you know what? It kind of backfired on Gorbachev.
How so?
Well, people started demanding more freedom, not just in the Soviet Union, but in the Eastern European countries, too. They wanted out.
And that led to...
Fall of the Berlin Wall.
Man, 1989, what a year. Those images, they're incredible. Seeing people tear down that wall with their bare hands.
It was a powerful moment, the end of an era.
And it wasn't just the wall, right? The whole Soviet system just, like, collapsed. And by 1991, the Cold War was officially over.
It's crazy to think that it all really happened, right? This decades-long standoff that shaped the entire world.
And it makes you wonder, are we really out of the woods now? Like, could something like that happen again?
That's the question, isn't it? All we can do is learn from the past, try to avoid making the same mistakes.
Keep talking to each other, find common ground.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I think we've done our deep dive for today. Hopefully you've learned something new about the Cold War, even if it's just how close we came to, total disaster.
It's a fascinating, if slightly terrifying, part of history.
Definitely. Thanks for listening, everybody, and until next time, stay curious.